In many cities, there's a place most people walk past without noticing. A memorial made of stone and metal, filled with names that no longer speak, yet still mean everything to someone. It was at one of these places that a school field trip took a turn no one expected. Lucas was 17. Like most teenagers, he was glued to his phone, chasing likes, trying to be funny for his followers. When the group arrived at the war memorial, he didn't feel anything. To him, it was just another stop on a boring trip. He took selfies, mocked the statues, made jokes about the names on the wall. Some laughed, others looked away. He thought it was harmless. But someone was watching. A man, older, seated on a nearby bench. A veteran. He didn't interrupt with anger. He didn't speak at all. He simply stood, pointed to a name on the wall, and let that moment carry its own weight. No shouting, no confrontation, just silence. That was all it took. Lucas didn't post. The video. He didn't say a word for the rest of the visit, but something shifted. Quietly, deeply, and permanently. This is not a story about punishment. It's a story about understanding, about how the smallest moments can become the most important, about how respect isn't taught through rules, but through presence. One silent act can stay with someone for a lifetime. Lucas came to that memorial looking for laughs. He left with a lesson he never expected and never forgot. On a Tuesday morning, in early spring, a public high school organized a field trip to the city's main war memorial. Located in a central plaza near the old courthouse, the memorial was a quiet, open-air space filled with large bronze statues and polished granite walls engraved with the names of fallen service members. It was a place designed for reflection, frequented by veterans, families of the deceased, and occasionally visited by tour groups and schoolchildren. The group that arrived just after 10 a.m. consisted of roughly 30 students, most around 16 or 17 years old, accompanied by 3 teachers. While the instructors explained the historical significance of the site, most students maintained a respectful, if distracted, posture. A few took photos of the statues. Some simply wandered, speaking quietly among themselves. One student, however, stood out. His name was Lucas Mitchell, 17 years old, a junior with a reputation for attention-seeking behavior. Known for posting short, often sarcastic videos to social media, Lucas appeared disengaged from the educational purpose of the visit. Wearing his hoodie up and earbuds in, he scrolled through his phone while the group listened to a presentation near the central monument. After a few minutes, Lucas walked away from the group and began recording videos of himself. At first, he took a few selfies in front of one of the bronze statues, a life-sized depiction of a kneeling soldier holding a helmet. Then he began posing with exaggerated expressions, feigning sorrow and saluting mockingly. He recorded short clips using filters, overlaying cartoonish graphics and humorous captions. In one video, he pretended to cry dramatically while pointing to the engraved names, adding background music to enhance the effect. He captioned the post with phrases like, "Rip to the real ones" and "Ghost Soldier vibes." It was intended as satire, designed to get laughs or likes online. He seemed unaware or unconcerned that his behavior was drawing uneasy looks from a few classmates nearby. What Lucas didn't notice was that he wasn't alone. Seated on a nearby bench was a man in his early 60s, quiet and observant. Dressed in jeans, a plain shirt, and a black cap embroidered with the words Veteran 2nd Infantry Division, the man had been there before the school group arrived. He had come alone, as he did every year, to pay respects to his younger brother, who had been killed in Afghanistan in 2010. The name was etched into the granite panel, just to the left of the central statue, the same one Lucas was mocking. The man remained seated for a few minutes, watching without expression. Then he stood and slowly walked toward the boy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't confront Lucas in any aggressive way. Instead, he simply approached, paused near the panel, and looked at one name among the hundreds. Lucas noticed the man standing there but continued filming. Eventually, however, the presence of someone nearby, silent and motionless, caused him to lower his phone. Their eyes met briefly. Something about the man's demeanor suggested he wasn't just another passerby. There was no need for a scene. The veteran pointed to a name on the wall. That was all. Lucas followed his gaze. The name meant nothing to him, but the implication was clear. Gradually, the tone shifted. The laughter stopped. A few students who had been watching turned away. One teacher noticed the situation and began walking over, but didn't intervene. There was no shouting, no argument, just a quiet, heavy pause. After a few moments, the man stepped back, nodded slightly, and returned to the bench. Lucas didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He closed the video app. He deleted the clips. Without anyone instructing him, he stopped filming altogether and walked slowly back toward the rest of the group. The teachers resumed the tour, and the incident wasn't formally addressed during the remainder of the visit. But something had clearly shifted in the atmosphere. Lucas, usually energetic and loud, remained quiet for the rest of the trip. He kept his phone in his pocket and didn't participate in further activities. He stood near the back of the group, avoiding attention. No formal complaint was filed, no report was made, but the students who witnessed the moment spoke about it later, some privately, others online. They described how a simple gesture from an older man, just standing, silently acknowledging a name on a wall, was enough to break through a layer of immaturity and provoke reflection in someone who rarely showed any. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There were no punishments handed out, but it became a story that circulated quietly in the school afterward. Teachers later commented that Lucas's behavior improved slightly in the weeks that followed. He became less disruptive, more reserved. Whether or not the encounter caused a lasting change was hard to say, but for that morning at least, the message had been received, and for the veteran it was just another visit. Another year. Another quiet reminder that those names on the wall were more than metal and stone. They were lives. They were family. And for a moment, someone remembered. In the days following the school field trip, the incident at the War Memorial didn't make any headlines. No one filed a report. No disciplinary action was taken. Yet, among the students who had been there, the moment left an impression that wasn't easily shaken. Lucas Mitchell, once known for being loud, sarcastic, and constantly recording content, for social media became noticeably quieter. He wasn't shunned or openly criticized, but the energy around him shifted. Conversations with classmates were shorter. People looked at him differently. Some avoided the topic entirely. Others brought it up in whispers, unsure of how to explain what had changed. His own behavior began to shift as well. He wasn't transformed overnight, but the difference was visible. He used his phone less during school hours. He stayed more to himself. He wasn't as quick to make jokes or draw attention. The mocking humor disappeared from his posts. His usual performance, the one always aimed at getting a reaction, faded. Teachers noticed but didn't comment directly. During one history class, a teacher spoke broadly about the importance of public memorials, of how they represent not just history, but grief, and memory, and identity. No names were mentioned, and no references made to the recent event, but the message was unmistakable. Students listened. Lucas did too. He sat still, hands folded, eyes fixed on his desk. Meanwhile, the veteran who had witnessed and interrupted the disrespectful act returned to his quiet life. He did not reach out to the school. He didn't tell the story to the press or post anything online. For him, it had been just another visit to the memorial, a yearly habit to honor the memory of his younger brother, whose name was etched into the stone. That particular day, something different happened, but he had not been seeking attention. He had simply responded to what he saw, the only way he knew how, calmly, and directly. What he didn't realize was how far that response would reach. The moment had an effect not only on Lucas but on others who had been there. One student who had witnessed the scene later wrote an essay for a local youth writing contest about the experience of seeing someone confront loss with dignity. Another began reading about the war in Afghanistan for the first time, researching the lives of soldiers from their own state. These were small, quiet changes, nothing dramatic, but they were real. Lucas, for reasons he never explained, began returning to the memorial on his own. The first time was the Saturday after the trip. He took a city bus alone, walked the 2 blocks to the plaza, and stood in front of the same statue where he had mocked the tribute days before. There was no crowd this time, no friends, no phone in hand. He didn't take any photos. He didn't speak. He just stood there, reading the names slowly, letting the silence settle in. He stayed about 10 minutes, then walked away. But he came back. Once a month, sometimes twice, Lucas visited the site. He never told anyone. He went, quietly, stayed a short while, and left without drawing attention. He never recorded it, never posted about it. It wasn't for anyone else. This routine continued for the remainder of the school year. No one noticed until one of the teachers happened to pass by the memorial one afternoon and saw him standing there alone. The teacher didn't approach. He simply observed from a distance and mentioned it later in a staff meeting, not as a reprimand or concern, but as a quiet example of how some lessons don't need to be taught out loud. Toward the end of the school year, the school organized a local exhibition on military history. They invited students to contribute presentations, essays, or art projects connected to national service or remembrance. Each class was responsible for one element of the display. Surprisingly, Lucas volunteered to write a short piece about the purpose of public memorials and how they serve as places of memory, not just for those who served, but for entire communities. His writing didn't reference his personal experience. There were no dramatic revelations, but it was clear, focused, and mature. The essay was chosen to be read aloud during the exhibition's opening. Parents, faculty, and students gathered. In the auditorium, Lucas sat in the back while another student read his words. The room remained silent throughout. When the reading finished, there was a quiet round of applause. There were no awards given, no spotlight. But those who had known Lucas before saw the difference. He didn't become the perfect student. He didn't suddenly excel in all subjects or take on leadership roles. But he changed in small, consistent ways. He spoke with more care, thought longer before making jokes. He seemed more present, and above all, he showed respect for things he hadn't understood before. There was no official record of what happened that day at the memorial. No file, no reprimand, no praise. But those who were there remembered, and they told others. Not loudly, but clearly. The veteran never knew any of this. For him, it remained a quiet moment in an ordinary week. A brief interruption to a personal ritual. Another year, another visit. The weight of loss unchanged. But that simple, silent act, standing beside a name and pointing to it, had been enough. Enough to pause a boy's laughter, enough to shift the path of someone still figuring out who they were, and enough to remind a small group of teenagers that history isn't just something in books or museums. Sometimes it's written in bronze, and sometimes it stands quietly in front of you, wearing a cap with a division name you've never heard of, asking for nothing but showing you everything. As the school year moved forward, the field trip incident gradually faded from regular conversation. New routines took over. Exams approached, clubs, sports, and graduation preparations filled the school calendar. Yet, for some, the memory of that quiet moment at the memorial remained in the background, unchanging and unresolved. Lucas Mitchell continued his quiet routine. He no longer engaged in the type of behavior that had once defined his presence, at school. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He didn't draw attention to the changes he had made. He simply avoided the behaviors that had once seemed entertaining or provocative. The phone that had once been an extension of his hand remained in his backpack for most of the day. His online presence continued, but it had shifted focus. Less performance, fewer jokes, more neutral posts. The memorial visits continued too. Always alone, always unannounced. There was no specific schedule, but they occurred regularly enough. That city security cameras near the plaza captured his presence several times over the course of 2 months. Each visit followed the same pattern: arrive, walk to the central panel, pause for several minutes, then leave without speaking to anyone. In early May, the city organized its annual Veterans Day tribute. It was a small but well-attended event, held on a Saturday morning. Families of veterans gathered alongside community members, local officials, and representatives from military organizations. A temporary stage was set up near the edge of the plaza. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. The air was crisp, and small American flags lined the sidewalks. Lucas went, not as part of a school group, not because anyone told him to. He arrived, alone, quietly, and stood in the back of the crowd. He didn't wear anything special, no uniform, no formal attire, but he remained still and attentive throughout the ceremony. He listened to the speeches. He watched the flag raising. He stood silently during the moment of remembrance. He didn't speak to anyone. He left before the reception began. Later that day, a volunteer with the local Veterans Committee noticed that someone had left a small handwritten note at the base of the main statue. The note wasn't addressed to anyone. It had no name on it. Just a short message. "I didn't understand before, but I see it now. Thank you for your service." The note was folded carefully and placed under a small white stone. No one knew who left it. No one removed it. The veteran who had witnessed the original incident returned to the memorial that same weekend. As in previous years, he followed the same path, arriving early, walking to the panel, sitting at the same bench. This time, he noticed the note and paused to read it. He didn't react visibly. He simply stood for a moment, then sat down as usual, remaining in place for nearly an hour before leaving. There was no way for him to know whether the note was from the same boy he had seen months earlier. He didn't ask. Lucas never claimed responsibility for it. He never discussed the incident with anyone at school. He didn't bring it up with his teachers or classmates. For him, the moment had already passed, but its effect lingered. It no longer needed explanation. In June, as the academic year came to a close, the school published a year-end journal highlighting events, projects, and student achievements. In one section dedicated to community service and civic engagement, a teacher wrote a brief editorial about the importance of respect in public spaces, especially those connected to military service. Though no names were mentioned, the piece was clearly inspired by the memorial incident. It described how sometimes a person can be reminded of their values without punishment, and how awareness can grow in quiet places. Lucas read the article. He didn't react. But those who had followed the story knew it was about him. The veteran never returned to the school or made contact with its staff. His connection to the moment remained limited to that one encounter. He continued to visit the memorial as always, continuing a tradition rooted in grief and loyalty. His routine was unchanged, and he never sought follow-up or recognition. But in the minds of those involved, the moment had become a quiet turning point. Lucas graduated the following year. His behavior had stabilized. He wasn't a top student, nor the most involved, but he had become consistent. Teachers described him as more grounded, more aware, and more respectful. He completed his coursework without issue. He participated in group activities without conflict. He remained mostly quiet, but when he spoke, he chose his words carefully. After graduation, he did not stay in town. He moved to a neighboring city for work and enrolled in a part-time technical program. Few classmates stayed in touch, but his name remained associated with the lesson many had witnessed, not because of what he had done wrong, but because of how clearly he had changed. Years later, the story resurfaced. A new teacher at the school found a copy of the student exhibition catalog from that year and read the essay Lucas had submitted. The teacher asked about the author, and someone recalled the incident at the memorial. Slowly, the story was pieced together again, not to shame, but as a quiet example of how a single encounter, in the right place and at the right time, can shift a person's trajectory. There had been no punishment, no viral post, no public lecture, just a quiet man pointing to a name on a wall, and a boy who decided to listen. Years passed, and the story of Lucas Mitchell remained largely unspoken. It wasn't a story told in school assemblies or written in official records. It didn't circulate as a viral moment or become a topic for debate. Instead, it settled quietly in the memory of those who had been there, teachers, students, and one man whose annual visit to a wall of names had unknowingly changed someone's life. Lucas built a life outside the town where it happened. He completed his technical training and began working in the maintenance division of a transportation company. He didn't return for reunions or school events. His name was rarely mentioned except in passing by those who remembered him from before, as the boy who had once laughed in the wrong place and then stopped laughing for the right reason. He never told anyone about the incident. It wasn't part of his online profile. It didn't show up in interviews or conversations, but the effects were visible in other ways. He became known in his workplace as someone dependable, methodical, and respectful. Supervisors noticed that he listened more than he spoke. He wasn't quick to make jokes, but when he did, they were thoughtful and well-placed. Colleagues said he paid attention to things most people ignored: small safety details, forgotten equipment, minor repairs. His attention to detail wasn't just technical, it was emotional. He noticed when people were having a hard day. He held space for silence. On weekends, he volunteered at a local veterans center, not out of any personal connection to the military, but because, as he once told a coordinator, some people gave more than we know. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Occasionally, he returned to the city where he had grown up. These visits were brief and infrequent, usually to see family or attend small gatherings. When he did visit, he always stopped by the memorial. The visits were consistent. No matter the season, he walked the same route, paused at the same spot, and stayed for the same length of time. He never took photos, never left flowers. Sometimes, he brought a small rock or coin and placed it on the edge of the stone wall, a quiet tradition among those who understood its meaning. He didn't speak during these visits. He stood still. He read the names, and then he left. 1. Afternoon, nearly 6 years after the original incident, a staff member from the city's Veterans Committee recognized him. She remembered the boy from the stories told quietly among the volunteer group, the unnamed student who had once disrespected the memorial and later returned, changed. She approached him gently and asked if he had come to honor someone in particular. He simply said, "Not by name." She left it at that. Later that year, the committee began working on a local oral history project. They were collecting stories from veterans, family members, and citizens who had a personal connection to the memorial. The goal was to document the quiet memories behind the names, to preserve not just history, but the emotional legacy surrounding it. Lucas was invited to contribute. At first, he declined. He said he wasn't a veteran, didn't lose anyone in war, and didn't feel his story mattered. But after some thought, he agreed to write a short, anonymous entry. His story was included in a small printed booklet distributed at the next Memorial Day service. It read, There was a time I didn't understand the weight of this place. I treated it like a backdrop, a stage, a joke. One day I saw someone who didn't say a word. He only pointed. That was enough. I don't know the name he showed me. I never asked, but I carry it with me anyway. Sometimes the people who change your life don't know they did, and sometimes the names we forget are the ones we owe the most. No one knew the author, but some recognized the words. The veteran, who had once stood silently by the wall, never knew the story had been recorded. He continued his visits unchanged. Time had aged him, but he walked the same path, paused at the same names, and sat on the same bench. He didn't expect recognition. He never learned that his quiet action had become a lesson passed quietly from one generation to another. He had simply done what he always did, honored the fallen and upheld the memory of those who served beside his brother, names that meant the world to him, even if they meant nothing to the world. Lucas Mitchell never returned to his old school, but his story remained, not as a warning, but as a reminder that character is often shaped in moments no one sees coming, and that respect isn't taught through force, but through presence. The wall still stands. New names have been added, and sometimes, if you pass by on a quiet day, you might see someone standing alone, not filming, not speaking, not performing, just remembering, and maybe, like Lucas once did, learning something that can't be taught in a classroom. The story of Lucas Mitchell never became news. It was not published on websites, did not generate headlines, and earned no awards or public ceremonies. It happened, was witnessed by a few, and lived on only in the memory of those who paid attention, like so many other stories that shape lives far from public view. Time passed. The city grew. New buildings rose around the central plaza. The memorial, however, remained untouched. The granite panels were restored, the statues cleaned, and the lighting upgraded. Each year, new names were added, more recent soldiers, fresh. Losses added to the weight of the stone. The school that once brought students to the memorial also changed. Teachers retired. New classes arrived. The case involving Lucas faded as an event, but lingered as an example quietly passed down by a few educators. When new generations visited the memorial, the incident was never retold directly. But there was always a warning, a request for silence and respect, which, though general, carried real weight for those who knew the context. Lucas, now an adult, stayed out of touch with former classmates. His life followed a simple rhythm: steady work. Basic responsibilities, few words. He didn't seek recognition, he preferred routine. He avoided attention. One thing never changed: his connection to the memorial. Even with the demands of adult life, he still found time to visit the site at least twice a year. Once in May, around Memorial Day, and again in late November, when the air grew cold and fewer people passed through. In these visits, his behavior was unchanged: quiet, respectful, alone. One year, he brought a young nephew. It was the only time he came accompanied. He didn't explain much, just walked the boy through the plaza, pointed at the statues, and watched as the child read a few names aloud. Then they left. No photos were taken, nothing was posted. Just a discreet act of passing on a value. The memorial continued receiving visitors: veterans, families, school groups, the occasional tourist. Most came and went without knowing that years ago, on that same ground, a boy had once laughed at a symbol and was silenced by a presence that said more than words. Among the city's staff and memorial volunteers, stories like Lucas's became a sort of undocumented oral tradition. Everyone knew that, from time to time, someone would show up not to look, but to remember. These visitors rarely left flowers. Some just stood for a while, then quietly left. And often, it was those silent visitors who had been changed the most by what the memorial represented. Lucas had no idea his story had inspired others. He didn't know that. Years later, a new teacher adapted his anonymous essay as a classroom reading for high school students. He didn't know that, at one city ceremony, a veteran had mentioned, without naming, a young man who learned in the quietest way possible what sacrifice really means. He didn't need to know. For him, the lesson was personal, untouchable. It didn't need validation. Once, while visiting City Hall to renew a document, he noticed an old photo on a bulletin board showing a memorial event from years before. In the corner of the image, almost unnoticeable, was a younger version of himself, standing in the back of the crowd near the stone wall. The photo had no caption, only a note marking the year and occasion. He looked at it for a few seconds. He didn't take it down. He didn't mention it to anyone. He simply went on with his day. The memorial, for its part, never stopped teaching. It didn't speak. It didn't shout. It didn't correct anyone. It simply stood every day to remind those willing to remember and to quietly confront those who needed reminding. It was a place with no printed rules about behavior, no warnings posted. The respect it demanded didn't come from rules but from meaning. It was something understood over time, or, as in Lucas's case, through the sudden weight of a truth that could not be ignored. He was one of many young people who passed through without understanding. But unlike most, he stopped. He reflected. He changed, not out of fear, not from guilt, but because something in that cold wall of names forced him to see beyond himself. Years later, walking through other cities, he always noticed their memorials. Even small ones, even neglected ones, caught his eye. He would pause, read the names, most of them unfamiliar, and quietly move on. He carried within him a sense of debt. Not to anyone specific, but to all those who once served and never came home. Lucas Mitchell never became a hero, but he never again became the boy who laughed at a statue. He became something far rarer, someone who learned in silence and who, out of respect, chose to carry that lesson for life. And maybe in the end, that's all memory ever asks for. Not applause, not attention, just someone who, even when no one is watching, refuses to forget. Some lessons don't come from lectures. They don't come from punishment, or argument, or public shame. Sometimes, they come in the quietest way possible, from a stranger who says nothing, standing beside a wall of names that most people walk past without reading. Lucas Mitchell was not unique in his mistakes. Many young people test boundaries. Many misunderstand the weight of history until it stands directly in front of them. But what made his story different was what happened next. He chose to change. Not because someone forced him, but because he saw, just for a moment, what sacrifice really means. The man who showed him that never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His presence, his grief, and his dignity said more than any words ever could. And in that moment, a careless boy became a man who would never forget. This is not a story of punishment. It's a story of perspective, of what happens when someone is willing to stop, listen, and carry forward a lesson written not in textbooks, but in names carved in stone. So the next time you walk past a memorial, stop, read, remember, because someone gave up everything so you could keep walking, and if you carry their memory with you, even silently, that's enough.